Hello, Richard Morris here this morning, beautiful Sydney. Just thought I'd have a quick note about factors warranting when it comes to family provision claims. So factors warranting can come into play for certain types of eligible persons for the purposes of bringing a family provision claim. So the context that I'm going to speak about today is for stepchildren. So a stepchild in New South Wales is not eligible to bring a claim just in of itself. So it's a common source of litigation because you have children who of a previous marriage, and you might have a deceased who leaves the whole of their estate to their new partner. So those biological children of the first deceased will then bring a claim effectively against litigation against their step parent to try to seek provision from their biological parent. That's a common source of litigation. A less common source of litigation is one where you have the stepchild bringing a claim on their step parent's estate. Often it's the case because the horse is already bolted and the estate of their biological parent was left to that step parent some years before, and now the stepchild's in a situation where that step parent's then left them out of a later will and they're trying to seek some provision. So stepchildren, just in of itself, you're not eligible to bring a claim. However, they may fall into, or typically they fall into one other category, and that usually where the second relationship has been entered into when the children were young. You might have a situation where the stepchildren were effectively raised by their step-parent. Often, as I said, when they're primary school age, their parents get together. So you have a situation where they've been a member of the household, so they've lived with that step-parent, and there's also been some level of dependency. So dependency is not limited to purely financial or material matters. So there's a leading authority called Tobin and Ezekiel. That case had a bit of a discussion about what dependency is. Can be partial. It doesn't have to be, as I said, wholly financial. It just could mean that they relied on that step-parent for care, and the step-parent effectively stepped into the shoes of what would normally be considered a parental type role. So a partial dependency as well, that's not something that's just a minimal sort of amount of dependency. It needs to have some substance to it, but it's not a high threshold to get over. Obviously, if someone's 5 years old and they're living with someone, even if they're not financially dependent on them, there's still going to be a level of care provided to them. So what are factors warranting? If you fall into that category of being a member of the household and financially or dependent on the person, sorry about the flies, then there's another level to it. You need to have some level of factors warranting that warrant the bringing of the application above and beyond just merely fitting into that category. So what are factors warranting? There's nothing in the Act, helpfully, about what are factors warranting, but there's been obviously plenty of cases exploring it. In the case of Fulop or re-Fulop, then in the context of what would be a household, for instance, they talked about a recognition that they're part of that family unit. There's a case of Grisani as well, where the factors warranting, it looks at the nature of the relationship between the stepchild and the step-parent, but also the quality of that relationship. It's moving the stepchild from being just merely a stepchild to someone who you would expect the deceased to have had some level of moral obligation towards, or moral obligation that they would leave something to them from their will. So the quality of that relationship, it's a very open category or open definition in terms of what are factors warranting, but you're looking at the quality of that relationship, whether they were considered a permanent member of the household, and whether they were really supported by the deceased in a financial, educational or emotional way. So it goes above and beyond just merely fitting into that dependent member of the household. And that's really what the courts are looking for. So I hope you found that informative. And as always, if you've got any questions or concerns or queries, please feel free to contact myself or the team at Morris Succession Lawyers.